All right, welcome everyone to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at, well, it's a pretty wild one, the 2006 film 300.
Yeah, this one is definitely a conversation starter.
Yeah, it seems like just about everybody has seen this one, and some people have very strong feelings about it one way or the other. So, thanks to you guys, you sent in a ton of material from IMDb, and we've got the main movie page and a bunch of user reviews. So that's going to be our source material today.
Should be interesting.
Yeah, our mission today is to kind of unpack what is it about this film that makes it so talked about, so celebrated by some, and so controversial by others.
Yeah, like why is this film still so potent?
Yeah.
Even all these years later,
Yeah.
What are the ingredients, so to
Right,
speak?
exactly. So let's start with a little bit of a background and set the stage. From the IMDb page, 300 was directed by Zack Snyder.
Oh, Zack Snyder, yeah.
Of course, yeah. And it clocks in at 1 hour and 57 minutes. So, a pretty standard runtime for a big action movie. It's rated R, so lots of, intense battle sequences.
Oh, yeah, lots of red.
Lots of red, for sure.
Yeah.
It takes us back to ancient Greece.
Ancient Greece, yeah.
To the Battle of Thermopylae.
Which, just for anyone who needs a refresher, that was the battle where King Leonidas and his Spartan warriors, 300 of them.
300 Spartans.
Yeah, 300 Spartans made this epic last stand against Xerxes, the Persian king.
Mm-hmm.
And he had, a massive army, like overwhelmingly huge numbers.
Yeah, talk about an underdog story, huh?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Classic underdog story.
So IMDb tags the film as action, for sure. And then the cast, this is a pretty impressive lineup. You've got Gerard Butler as King Leonidas.
Gerard Butler, yeah, he really embodies that Spartan warrior king, doesn't he?
Absolutely. Lena Headey as Queen Morga.
She's fantastic. She brings a real power to that role.
For sure. David Wenham as Dilios. He's our narrator.
Yeah.
And then you've got Rodrigo Santoro as Xerxes.
And he's such an interesting Xerxes. Very, very memorable performance. Very stylized.
Definitely. All right, so before we dive into the nitty-gritty of the reviews, what does IMDb tell us about, how the film was received?
Well, it's got a pretty respectable 7.6 out of 10 rating, which is, I think, pretty good.
Yeah, that's solid.
Yeah. And check this out. Almost 900,000 user votes. 887,000 to be exact.
Wow, that's a lot of people chiming in. So clearly it resonated with a lot of viewers.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely had an impact. But then we've got a Metascore of 52.
Okay, so that's a bit lower, isn't it? That suggests a more mixed response from the critics, maybe? Yeah, it seems like the critics maybe weren't as impressed as the general audience. And then looking at the box office, it raked in over $210 million in the US and Canada and over $456 million worldwide.
Wow.
Yeah, against a budget of just $65 million.
Okay, so it was a huge financial success. Those numbers speak for themselves.
It definitely found its audience. It also picked up 19 wins and 57 nominations for various awards.
Yeah, so it got some recognition from the industry, too.
Absolutely. So, looking at all of this, it's clear that 300 made a splash.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is the range of reactions, right?
Yeah, you've got this huge audience score, but then a lower Metascore, and, anecdotally, you hear people either loving it or hating it, so it's clearly a divisive film.
Totally. So our big questions today, and we'll be drawing directly from the user reviews you guys sent in, are what are the elements that really grabbed audiences? What worked? What didn't work? Where did the movie draw criticism? And how did the film's very unique visual style, which as we mentioned is pulled straight from the graphic novel, shape how it was received?
Yeah, great questions. I'm curious to see what the reviews reveal.
Me too. So I think the most obvious place to start is with the visuals. You can't talk about 300 without talking about how it looks.
Oh, absolutely. It's a visually striking film. It's one of the first things that comes to mind, that visual style.
Exactly. And going through the reviews, it's fascinating because whether people loved the film or hated it, just about everyone commented on the visuals.
Yeah, for sure.
On the positive side, you see words like visually stunning, breathtaking CGI, stylized, graphic novel-like, artistic, even hyper-stylized.
Yeah, it's like they took the pages of the graphic novel and brought them to life.
Yeah.
There's a reason why it's considered such a faithful adaptation visually.
Totally. A lot of reviewers praised that, they felt like Snyder really captured the essence of the graphic novel, and they specifically mention the extensive use of green screen, those dramatic slow motion sequences during the fights, and the really distinct color palette.
Yeah, that color palette is so iconic. The desaturated blues and golds, the high contrast. It gives it that kind of like almost otherworldly feel.
Yeah, it's very stylized, very deliberate. And, some people absolutely loved it. Like one reviewer even said that every single frame could be a painting.
Wow. That's a strong statement. But I get it. There's a real artistry to the way the film looks.
Absolutely. But then, of course, you got the other side of the coin. You've got reviewers using terms like atrocious, artificial. Some even compared it to a poorly produced video game cutscene,
Ouch.
or just saying it's overdone. And, I think it's interesting how something so visually striking can elicit such drastically different reactions.
Yeah, it's really polarizing, isn't it? I think it comes down to taste and expectations. Some people love that heightened, stylized look, while others find it distracting or even off-putting. It can take you out of the story if you're not into that kind of aesthetic.
Right. And a lot of reviewers mentioned that Snyder was very committed to staying true to the graphic novel. I mean, one person even said that he had copies of the comic on set, like all over the place, as a reference.
Wow, so he really wanted to nail that look, huh? I mean, you can definitely see the influence.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Which brings us to that whole idea of style over substance.
Ah, the age-old debate.
Right. So, for the people who loved the movie, do you think the visuals themselves became a kind of substance? Like, even if they acknowledged that the plot was pretty straightforward, did the way it looked make up for that?
I think for some people, absolutely. Like, the visuals were so captivating and immersive that they became the main attraction. They weren't necessarily looking for a complex narrative or deep character development. They were there for the visual spectacle, and 300 definitely delivered on that front.
Yeah, it's like the style is the story, in a way.
Exactly. And the way it was shot, the slow motion, the color palette, it all worked together to create this heightened reality, this almost mythic feel. It's like you're watching a moving painting or something.
Okay. But then for the people who criticize the film, do you think the lack of a more complex plot or more nuanced characters just couldn't be overlooked, even with the impressive visuals?
Yeah, I think for those viewers, the visuals weren't enough to sustain their interest. They felt like the movie was all style and no substance, like it was lacking depth.
Yeah, like a beautiful but empty shell.
Exactly.
So let's move on to another big part of 300, the action.
Oh, yeah, there's plenty of that.
Tons of it. And reading through the reviews, it seems like a lot of people really enjoyed the action sequences. They used words like riveting, breathtaking, well done, adrenaline pumping, even brutal.
Yeah, and stylish too, right? I mean, the action is very much in line with the overall aesthetic of the film.
Oh, totally. So what do you think works so well about the action? What made it stand out for people?
I think the choreography is a big part of it. The fight scenes are very well staged, and they have a real visceral impact. You feel every blow.
It's very intense, very in your face.
Exactly. And then there's the use of slow motion, which, when it's done well, can really enhance the action. It can highlight certain moments, make them more dramatic, more impactful.
Yeah, like give them the extra oomph. And it also plays into that graphic novel aesthetic, right? Freezing a moment in time, making it almost iconic.
For sure. But, like with the visuals, the slow motion was also a point of contention for some viewers. Some people felt like it was overused, that it became repetitive and even gratuitous after a while.
Yeah, like it lost its impact.
Exactly.
And then there's this interesting argument that popped up in the reviews, which is that 300 is mainly about entertainment. It's popcorn fun, and it's not meant to be taken too seriously. It's not trying to be historically accurate or anything like that.
But it's like a comic book come to life. It's meant to be over the top and exciting.
Exactly. And some people were totally fine with that. They went in expecting a fun, action-packed spectacle, and that's exactly what they got.
Yeah, if you're in the mood for that, 300 definitely delivers.
For sure. But of course, there were people who felt differently. They felt like the action, while impressive, was ultimately mindless. They wanted more depth, more substance.
Yeah, it's that same debate we were having about the visuals, right? Style versus substance. Some people are satisfied with the style, while others crave something more.
Exactly. Okay, so this leads us to what I think is the biggest area of controversy surrounding 300, and that's its historical accuracy, or lack thereof, and the various political interpretations that came out of that.
Ah, yes, the historical accuracy debate. It's a big one with this film.
It's a huge one. And it's interesting because a lot of the reviewers actually acknowledged up front that the movie is not historically accurate. Like, they made it clear that it's based on a graphic novel, a fictional retelling, and not meant to be a documentary.
Right, so they knew going in that it was going to take liberties with history.
Exactly. But even with that understanding, there were some very specific criticisms, particularly about the portrayal of the Persians.
Yeah, the Persians definitely get the villain treatment in this film.
They do, and a lot of reviewers called out that portrayal using words like monstrous, barbaric, dehumanized.
Yeah, they're depicted as this kind of savage, almost inhuman horde. And, historically, the Persian Empire was actually a very sophisticated, multicultural civilization.
Mm,
So there's definitely a disconnect there.
a big disconnect, and some people felt like that portrayal played into some harmful stereotypes.
Right, it's like the film is using these really simplistic, almost cartoonish depictions of the enemy
Hmm.
to create this black and white good versus evil dynamic.
Yeah, and that can be problematic, especially when you're dealing with real historical cultures and events.
Absolutely.
Now, some people defended the portrayal of the Persians, saying that it's meant to be from the Spartan perspective, that it's an exaggeration for dramatic effect, like this is how the Spartans saw their enemies.
Which, to be fair, the film is largely told from the Spartan point of view. So it's possible that the depiction of the Persians reflects their biases and their propaganda.
Right, like this is their version of events. But, even with that explanation, some viewers still felt like it crossed a line. There were accusations of racism, xenophobia, even phrases like nationalistic crap being thrown around.
Yeah, those are serious accusations.
Yeah.
And it shows how sensitive these issues are, especially when you're dealing with historical narratives and representations of different cultures.
Absolutely. And it's important for us to acknowledge those viewpoints, to present them impartially as part of the overall response to the film.
Definitely. It's crucial to understand how different viewers interpreted the film and why certain elements resonated with them in ways that maybe the filmmakers didn't intend.
Right. And then, just to lighten the mood a little bit, one reviewer made this funny comment pointing out that the film couldn't possibly be pro-Bush administration propaganda because the graphic novel came out way before that whole era. Uh-huh. That's a good point. It shows how people can sometimes read their own contemporary political anxieties into works of art, even if those anxieties weren't relevant at the time of creation.
Right. It's a reminder that art can be interpreted in so many different ways, and that those interpretations can change over time depending on the context.
For sure.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about the plot, the dialogue, and the characters themselves. And, reading through the reviews, it seems like the general consensus is that the plot is pretty simple, pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it's not exactly a twisty-turny narrative, is it?
No, not really. People described it as thin, basic, something you could summarize in a sentence or two.
Which, isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes a simple plot can be effective, especially if it's well executed.
Right. And I think in the case of 300, the focus is really on the spectacle, on the action, on the visuals. So a more complex plot might have actually detracted from that.
Yeah, it could have bogged down the pacing or taken away from the visceral impact of the battles. Exactly. But, for some viewers, that simplicity was a drawback. They wanted more narrative complexity, more intrigue.
Right. They wanted something to really sink their teeth into, intellectually speaking.
Exactly. And then there's the dialogue,
Yes, the dialogue.
which got a bit of a mixed response, to put it mildly.
Yeah, some of those lines are pretty memorable, for better or for worse.
Yeah, memorable is a good word. A lot of reviewers use words like campy, cheesy, simplistic, even dumb to describe the dialogue.
Yeah, it's definitely not known for its subtlety or nuance.
No, not at all. It's very much in your face, very dramatic, very over the top, which, again, fits with the overall style of the film.
Right, it's like they're leaning into that heightened, almost operatic tone.
Exactly. But, it's interesting because even though a lot of people criticize the dialogue overall, there are certain lines that have become iconic.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, you can't talk about 300 without mentioning This is Sparta.
Right.
Yeah.
That line is just so memorable, so quotable. It's become part of pop culture.
It's like it transcended the film itself and became this catchphrase, this meme almost.
Exactly. And then in terms of character development, a lot of reviewers felt like it was lacking. They said the characters were pretty one-dimensional, that it was hard to connect with them on an emotional level.
Yeah, they're more like archetypes than fully fleshed out characters, right?
Yeah.
They represent these Spartan ideals of courage, strength, sacrifice.
Right. And, I think part of that is just the nature of the story. It's about this epic battle, this last stand. So the focus is on the action, on the spectacle, and there's not a lot of time to delve into individual characters' backstories or motivations.
Yeah, it's more about the collective, about the brotherhood of these warriors facing impossible odds.
Exactly. But, there were some standout performances that people praised.
Oh yeah, for sure. Gerard Butler as Leonidas, he really commands the screen. He brings a real intensity and gravitas to the role.
Absolutely. And Lena Headey as Queen Gorgo, she's fantastic too. She doesn't have a ton of screen time, but she makes a real impact.
Yeah, she's a force to be reckoned with.
For sure. And then there's Xerxes, who is quite a character.
Oh yeah, Xerxes. He's larger than life, literally and figuratively.
He is. And people described him as memorable, a cinematic and artistic achievement, even superb, malevolent fun.
Yeah, he's definitely a scene stealer. He's got this over-the-top, almost godlike presence that's really captivating.
He's very stylized, very theatrical, and, as we talked about earlier, some people criticize that depiction, saying it's historically inaccurate and maybe even a little bit offensive.
Right, it plays into that whole othering of the enemy that we were discussing.
Exactly. And then there's Ephialtes, the hunchbacked wannabe warrior who, despite his physical deformity, ends up playing a pretty crucial role in the story.
Yeah, he's a tragic figure, really.
Yeah.
He wants to be a Spartan warrior,
Right.
but he's rejected because of his physical limitations. And that rejection leads him to betray the Spartans, which ultimately contributes to their downfall.
Yeah, it's a pretty sad story. And it adds a bit of moral complexity to the film. It's not just a simple good versus evil narrative.
Definitely. It shows how even within the Spartan society, there were divisions. There were people who were marginalized and ostracized.
For sure. It's interesting, too, how many reviewers compared 300 to other films and media. They mentioned Gladiator, Troy, Sin City, The Matrix, even The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, it's like they were trying to place 300 within the broader landscape of epic films and action cinema.
Exactly. And, some of those comparisons were about similarities in style or themes, like the visual style of Sin City, which is also based on a Frank Miller graphic novel, was mentioned a lot.
Right. There's definitely a shared aesthetic there.
Yeah. And then other comparisons were about contrasts, like how 300 is much more stylized and over the top than a film like Troy, which tries to be more historically accurate.
Yeah, it's like 300 is embracing the fantasy element, while Troy is trying to be more grounded in reality.
Exactly. And then some people pointed out that 300 could be seen as a modern take on the 1962 film The 300 Spartans, which, a lot of people might not even know about.
Yeah, it's interesting how this story has been told and retold in different eras of filmmaking.
For sure. It shows how this historical event, this battle, has this enduring power to capture our imaginations.
Absolutely.
And then I thought this was a great suggestion. One reviewer recommended watching the History Channel documentary, The Last Stand of the 300, alongside the film to get a more factual perspective.
Yeah, that's a great idea. It's always helpful to balance out fictionalized accounts with more historically rigorous sources.
Absolutely. So to wrap things up, what's the legacy of 300? I mean, it's clear that it had a huge impact, but what are people saying about it now, all these years later?
Well, the opinions are still pretty divided. You've got people who consider it a masterpiece, a classic of action cinema, a game changer in terms of visual effects.
Yeah, and they praise its style, its energy, its sheer entertainment value. They say it's a film that you either love or hate, but you can't deny its impact.
Exactly. And then you've got the people who still think it's a terrible mess, a historical travesty, a film full of empty spectacle and harmful stereotypes.
Right. And they criticize its lack of depth, its historical inaccuracies, its over-the-top style.
So yeah, it's still a very polarizing film. But one thing's for sure, it's a film that people are still talking about, debating, engaging with. And that's got to count for something, right?
It definitely does. It means it struck a chord, it made an impression. Whether you loved it or hated it, it got a reaction out of you.
Absolutely.
So, to summarize our deep dive into 300, it's a visually groundbreaking, highly stylized film that continues to spark strong reactions. Its intense action and bold aesthetic, taken straight from Frank Miller's graphic novel, were praised by many as innovative and thoroughly entertaining.
However, its historical inaccuracies and its simplified, sometimes controversial portrayal of ancient cultures continue to draw significant criticism.
And it leaves us with these lingering questions about the balance or imbalance of style and substance in filmmaking, about the artistic license taken when adapting historical events, and about the effectiveness of bringing a comic book to life on the big screen.
It's a film that challenges us to think about these issues and to examine our own expectations and preferences as viewers.
So, as always, we want to leave you with something to ponder. Considering the range of reactions to 300 and its undeniable visual influence on filmmaking, what do you think is the ultimate measure of success for a film that blends historical inspiration with fantastical storytelling? Is it primarily about entertainment value, artistic achievement, faithfulness to the source material, or something else entirely? Maybe revisiting Frank Miller's graphic novel or comparing 300 to other historical adaptations, ones that have taken different approaches, could offer you some further food for thought.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic to explore. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time.